So the ANC National Executive Committee meeting reconvenes this evening, expected to start now at 7 o'clock to deliberate on the political future of leaders charged with corruption. So proceedings apparently descended into chaos last night after the ANC president presented a resolution that all leaders charged with corruption must step aside within 7 days. So the ANC president, Cyril Ramaphosa's closing address had to be postponed due to the chaotic scenes that unfolded at that meeting. So it stipulates that all members who are facing criminal charges must step aside until their court cases are concluded. It is understood that implicated members should step aside within 7 days of being charged. Those who are refusing to step aside will be suspended from the party, and this information should be communicated to the Deputy Secretary General. Let's chat a bit more about that now. Sanusha Naidoo joins me now. She's a political analyst from the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, very good evening to you. Thanks indeed for your time. Speaking to you a bit earlier, is the ANC caught in what we could refer to as a cul-de-sac, all by itself, unable to decide on resolutions that it took at Nasrec?
Good evening, Griselda, and to the viewers. I think you kind of summed it up very nicely, because it's basically the idea that you took your own resolutions, and these are resolutions that you must implement within the party level. And when you end up with a situation that you saw last night, where we were waiting for the president to address the media with the closing statement, and then all chaos descended within the party because there were members in the NEC that objected to what the content of the statement was going to be read with regard to that step-aside rule and the 7-day period. I think you kind of realize now that the stakes are really high, that the issue of who's going to give up their power, who's going to move away, step aside, it's not in the interest to do so. And so what you really saw was a moment, I think, for the ANC to come to a point where it needed to come to in terms of what kind of decisive action needs to be taken with regard to that resolution. What will happen tonight in terms of the resumption of the discussion around that step-aside rule, I think, again, will have to be determined in terms of whether or not there is enough political will and support within the NEC to say, we are going ahead with this implementation. We can't continue in this kind of loop that they see themselves in, because at the end of the day, it brings everything else to a standstill. People are waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think in terms of where the party is, I think it's really now a crunch time for the president and those that within the party that actually they voted on this resolution in 2017. So it's mind-boggling to think that you're still debating it.
But that's going to be very difficult, I guess, because I want to talk a bit about the trust deficit in the party. A deepening disunity, given the events of what we understand took place at the ANC NEC meeting yesterday. How difficult is that going to be, where you've got one side that belongs to one faction and the other that belongs to another?
Well, I think what's really interesting, if we just contextualize from what we could gather, knitting together the different reports and that have come out in terms of why the chaos descended, it seems to me that going into drafting that statement and putting that closing statement together around the 7-day rule in terms of stepping aside, it seemed to me that there was consensus within the NEC around adopting that kind of resolution and adopting that rule in terms of implementation. But then, of course, there are those elements within the NEC who don't necessarily believe that they should do this. And I think it comes back to the office of the SG. It comes back to the kinds of issues where the SG himself is not necessarily objecting to it, but the way it's playing out within the party. And you quite rightly point out that it's going to be a major, major battleground in terms of what comes out. If we hear something this evening in terms of the closing statement, what will be the resolution and the implementation of the decision taken? Would it be, I think we also kind of heard speculatively that there were people in the NEC that didn't really want this to be given a 14-day period for the SG to office to deal with it. They were scared that this will become another protractedness around it. So I think, again, what comes out tonight will really be the question of what the consensus of the majority view of the NEC is and how they move forward on that.
So I guess then what possible scenarios could play out tonight?
Well, I mean, we have kind of the speculative scenarios. I mean, we've heard if we do see a decision made and that they are going to implement this 7-day rule, then of course I think you're going to see more of the factional battlegrounds and the fault lines happening and deepening, as you rightly pointed out. Secondly, I think that you may have this idea that there could be a kind of an exit of certain individuals, but then bringing the party further into a fractious mode and a fractious context, because the question would be, what does this mean in the context of the ANC constitution, and are there possibilities that that there could be an early elective conference? I know we've been speculating around this, and I think there's a fluidity as well in understanding how the constitution of the ANC deals with this. And then let's not forget that there's a National General Council meeting supposedly scheduled for August later in the year, but we're not sure whether that could be brought forward. So I think the speculation is that it could be that there could be a kind of rally call to say, well, let's now start reflecting on the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the party. Mm-hmm. And of course, he's going to the Zondo Commission in April. So I think there's all kinds of important dynamics to understand. But again, it's all very fluid, because listening to the spokesperson of the ANC, he kept emphasizing in an interview that there's no disunity. And it's very hard to think about it given what has transpired last night.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Political analyst from the Institute for Global Dialogue, Sanusha Naidoo. Thanks indeed. That ANC NEC meeting was expected to get underway at 7 o'clock.